because it's paginated like the first year comp, and people do like the really big margins and things, because I'm kind of blind, so it'll go quick. And John tells me I read fast, so if I read too fast, John, just give me the... So this is a work that I published in Redivider some years ago, and not to give away too much of it, but it was based on a friend of mine that was a marketing manager at the University of South Florida, and he was dating a woman who had MS, and he was telling her, like, oh my gosh, that's, amazing, and he's like, well, we do this therapy every Friday where he gets these bees, and he was stinking her with bees. Have you heard of that? Yeah, and I'd never heard of that before. There's a name for it that I don't know. So I was fascinated by that, and I made him tell me everything about it. And I was still young and still getting my master's at USF. But I took that information, and I went to an office at USF. We could kind of see the top of Busch Gardens, and thought about that, and thought about the theme park, and my upbringing as a Baptist and the classic Adam and Eve story. And this is what I came up with. It's called Creature Comforts. Just hurry up and do it, Andrew said, his head buried into the pillow. I'm trying. Eva pinched the tweezers between her forefinger and thumb and dipped the instrument into the jar, which hummed in her hand. Carefully she selected, pulling out a bee. It twisted its torso with indignation, trying to find purchase. The pressure had to be steady. She had to hold the insect firmly or it would get away and try to hide in the light fixture above the bed, beating itself against the bulb until it died. If she held the bee too tightly, the tweezers might crack its exoskeleton, rendering it useless before she even had a chance. Eva surveyed Andrew's back by the dim Florida sunlight that filtered through the bedroom curtains. He was tattooed with the stings of bees that had come before this one, insects that had left a final mark before dying. Their poison drained from their bodies and absorbed into his, a natural pain reliever for the other damage he carried. She selected a patch of skin 2 inches below the lowest sting, close to the left side of his spine, and plunged a bee stinger into his back. Ouch, you bitch. He said it calmly, matter-of-factly. This was all her fault. Last one, Eva said. All done now. He reached out and pinched her on the forearm, twisting her skin before letting it go. She bit her lip and stayed quiet. It would bruise, she was sure, and leave a black and blue reminder that showed that she still did not have the upper hand. He might have the disease, but he was still in charge. There wouldn't be any questioning of that. What are you looking at? He demanded. Put my shirt back on me already. He sat up and put his arms into the air like a child. Where muscles had roped his arms now hung loose flesh. His forearms used to be alarmingly darker than his pale shoulders, a mark showing where his t-shirts had ended, leaving the rest of him to tan. Now his skin tone was almost even, a pallid, sickly gray like new clay. She thought she might tell him he should dress himself, to give his muscles a chance to stretch and lengthen. Then she pulled the shirt over his head. She remembered when she first met Andrew. He was one of the important employees at the amusement park where she found herself too. He was one of the roller coaster technicians and wore a light blue pinstripe shirt with his name importantly embroidered in red above the pocket. He knew how to fix machinery, would fearlessly climb the narrow steps that twisted alongside the rides to tighten a screw to check a track. Eva served quick-baked mini pizzas and Jell-O parfaits in one of the park's cafeterias. It was a quiet job, an invisible one. Eva grinned tightly as she remembered it then. It had been maybe a year ago. It was an eternity. I've got to go or I'll be late for work, she said, backing herself into the bedroom doorway. The beekeeper is supposed to drop off some more bees this morning. You'll be awake for him, right? He hates to just leave the jar on the porch. He says it'll cook him alive. Andrew murmured, staring out the window. The bedroom was sparse, those things, and almost all his. A single bed with white, sweaty sheets and hard pillows. A single dresser. The curtains left behind by the house's former owners, perhaps blue before they faded. Her things are in the closet, out of sight. She didn't have many things. It occurred to her it looked like a hospital room, even before he became ill. I can still hear it, you know. I can hear it now, he said suddenly, not looking at her. It drives me crazy. It's running without me, my roller coaster, just 2 blocks away, roaring over its tracks and scaring its riders all to hell. He half raised his arms before the movement winded him, causing his limbs to fall back down. You'll be back there someday, she said. They won't keep you out forever. You're going there now. You can go and I can't, so what do you know? I left $6 on the counter, she said, for the beekeeper. We can't afford the other medication, you know that. Damn bee stings on my back don't bring me comfort, Andrew said. They bring me pain. Everything does now. What are you, stupid? Get out. Eva pulled the bedroom door closed behind her and left quietly. She could still hear his words coming in a half-whisper, half-wheeze from behind the door. Please keep your hands and feet inside the ride at all times. Please secure your sunglasses, hats, and cameras. Busch Gardens is not responsible for any property you lose during your ride. Please do not sit on the handrails while you are standing in line. I said, do not sit on the handrails while you are standing in line. Hey, fat kid, I'm talking to you. Eva made her way through the living room, stopping for her purse, sitting on top of the TV before walking to the door. He had always courted Eva in the park, waiting for their shifts to end before they had walked the same paths. The monkey jungle, then the elephants would sway back and forth with boredom and fear, and through the little gardens with benches where exhausted parents collapsed. Their children would pull on their arms and whine, I want to ride it again, Mommy. I'm going to ride it again, now. He'd give her gifts. Things dropped by the riders when the coasters rolled them upside down and emptied their pockets. He gave her pens, chapsticks, baseball hats with sweaty brims, sometimes watches. She wanted to turn the items into lost and found, but Andrew made her keep them. It's a lesson. You can warn people to secure their items, but they don't listen, he had explained once after work. When the park closes, I'm supposed to make a sweep of the grass under the coaster, find all the lost stuff, and turn it into the boss. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I nick a 20 out of a wallet. They're lucky I don't keep everything. It had been 3 months after they began dating when Andrew had started feeling dizzy. He'd slow down his pace, stop in his path, and weave on his heels, his bulk threatening to fall to the front, to the back, to the front again. He'd tell her gruffly that he needed to sit down for a moment. Quit pulling me all over the place already. She'd whisper that she was sorry. One day she hadn't been with him, a December day that had climbed into the 90s. He told her he tried not to let his supervisor see how the heat was getting to him. He casually resting his weight on a wall, willing the sharp lights inside his head to go away. The supervisor had seen him. No sitting down on the job, he'd said quickly, almost darting away before the sentence left his mouth. That's the rule. So Andrew had stood up until little black dots swam before his eyes. It was 2 more months until he had sighed in the middle of a shift, walked away from his post, and finally headed over to Human Resources to file the insurance paperwork. It had been 7 more months since he'd stayed home, quiet, waiting to pounce on Eva for news of the park when she came home, smelling of cooking grease and sweat. But without him, she didn't go out much, choosing to stay in her line with the cafeteria until the evening came. She'd walk home, careful to stay in the shadows where the air was a little cooler, the light a little dimmer. Now Eva paused on the doorstep, her hand on the metal railing that led down their cement steps. The lawn here was rock, gravel put down, and Andrew decided it was too much to look after the grass. A rope hung from the rail where she tried to keep a stray dog for a while. It always rolled its eyes and tongue at her, looking hot, wanting to be free. When Eva had untied it, the dog ran out into the street and into the night towards the park, not looking back. She sunk her weight into her porch step, momentarily resting her hand on her knees. Last night she kissed questions into his hairline. Do you remember when you were king and I was everything else? Andrew had exhaled, his breath sour with his sickness, and turned away. She had rested her head against his back, inhaling his skin, an old bread smell. A growl of an engine drawing louder caused her to lift her head. An old red pickup truck, one of its headlights dangling down from the wire like a popped eye, was pulling up to the house. The beekeeper was early then. She felt a thick weight in the pit of her stomach, a sort of anticipation mixed with apprehension. He kept them in bees, but his coming also brought on the stings, the little act between Andrew and Eva that bonded them in a different way now. He was their savior, and their captor too. The truck grumbled to a stop. The beekeeper got up, favoring his left leg. He farmed a little tract of land north of Tampa, he told her once, early on, some citrus and flowers in a greenhouse that he sold on the roadside. He sold the bees on the side, those that didn't produce honey anymore, too worn out to produce anything but the venom that came naturally to them. He held the jar in his good hand. His other arm was withered into his sleeve, like a serpent, its hand not quite peeking out of the sleeve. He looked at her and nodded in greeting or simple acknowledgement. Eva didn't know. As he came closer, sliding one leg, stepping with the next, she tried not to stare. Then she wondered if looking away was just as shameful. He drew close. She could smell his tobacco, count the wrinkles that lined his dry lips, which worked against his teeth silently. He stopped a few inches from her. She felt him momentarily lean in as if to smell her. She looked at his boots, caked with dried mud and something else. $12 then, he said. 6 for this time, 6 for the last. Eva paused and then nodded. She knew she'd given Andrew the money for last week. She opened her purse, fumbling against napkins and discarded gum wrappers. Her hands grew warm and then wet as she counted out 4 single bills, and then quarters, then dimes, nickels. She made hills of the coins on the step beside her, willing them to multiply. When she reached $10, she was down to the copper coins. She looked up helplessly. She saw the beekeeper silently counting the flattened bills and hills of coins, his mouth working, frowning when he came up short too. He looked at her. "No money, no bees," he said. "Ain't running a charity here." "There's more in the house," she said, rising to her feet. "I'll go look." He wheezed loudly, shrugging his shoulders. Silently, he fished in the pockets of his overalls, bringing out a pocket knife and a hardened apple. Bracing the apple against his body with his withered hand, he used the other to cut into the fruit's stingy flesh, making a slice. "Falling on hard times then," he said. It didn't feel like a question. She didn't answer him. "I'll wait a little." "You like apples?" he said. She nodded, her stomach churning. "I don't mind sharing," he said. She hesitated and then held out her hand. He put the slice between his lips, holding it there. He sucked on its pulp, trying to draw out its juice. Eva watched silently, sickened. He spit the piece of fruit out into the ground, sliced another section. "I'll ask again," he said. "Do you want to share? It's an apple kiss." "What, you don't like apples?" She nodded, then shook her head no. "I'll go into the house, find some more money. You wait here," she said, backing up the stairs. "Ain't got all day," he said, staring at her. "You best be making up your mind." Her heart was knocking an impatient rhythm inside her chest. Inside, she walked briskly to the kitchen where she left the $6 on the countertop. It wasn't there. She looked at the bedroom door and did not go into it. She stepped into the kitchen where she kept a jar of change on the windowsill. She tried not to notice how the level of coins decreased a little more each month. She put her hand inside its mouth, drawing out a handful of coins. It wasn't going to last much longer. She could pick up more shifts, she thought, and try to draw out the inevitable. She went back outside. The beekeeper was still there, leaning against the handrail, looking towards the park. He turned his head and squinted at her, as though she'd become unfamiliar. "Been waiting long enough," he said. "You get what you needed?" She didn't bother to count the coins, but held them out. "Here's what you want," she said. The beekeeper silently regarded her hand and smiled at the thin line, shaking his head. He reached out to her with his good hand, caressing her knuckles with his cold fingers before taking the money. Eva shivered. "So until next week," the beekeeper said. "Next time." He reached past her to the step's handrail, his chest almost touching hers. Eva smelled his sweaty dampness like wet cardboard and something older. And then he was away from her again, turning on his good leg, shuffling a pattern into the ground as he made his way back into the truck. He left a side-winding trail in the stones of the yard, then in the dirt driveway. She watched the truck lumber away. She brought her hands to her face, wiping her brow. Her hands smelled like the coins, like copper, blood. She considered them, tanned from the sun, strong, with the short, blunt nails of a worker. She clenched them into fists and then loosened them again. She turned to the house. The beekeeper had left the jar and the half-eaten apple balanced there, side by side. Eva hesitated and then picked up the container. She held the jar close to her face. 20 bees, that was the order. 3 of them had already curled up on themselves and died, making soft clinking noises on the jar when Eva shook it. Other bees hummed drowsily, drunk from the sun, softly beating against the glass. It didn't matter. They would die from the heat or die from stinging. Eventually, they would die. Eva started to push the apple off the rail with her finger and then paused. She hadn't eaten yet today, and there would be no chance of it in the park where she served but never stopped for herself. She put the apple to her mouth, tasting the fruit, digging out the seeds with her tongue and rolling them in her mouth. If she planted them, perhaps they'd grow, sprouting from the gravel in the yard. They might become a vulnerable twig before they grew arms, reaching them to the sky. The roots would dig deeper into the ground, perhaps grow some leaves, perhaps even some fruit. They would do what trees are supposed to do.